apparently this is a point of contention among people who direct Macbeth. What do you do about the third murderer?
Yeah, I had that question reading it. It felt like a dangling thread. Like, who is this? Why is this important that a third murderer had shown up? Unclear.
Yeah. There's the delightful interpretation that you guys introduced me to, which I don't think I'd ever heard before, about maybe this is an incomplete play and there were other bits of it. The first folio was lost. I forget all the details of that.
Yeah.
Or as a person who wants to reify Shakespeare and make him into something he couldn't possibly have been, I want him to have left us that just so that hundreds of directors and actors through the generations will be like, what do we do about this? What does it mean?
Welcome, friends, to episode 218 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss Joel Coens' 2021 film, The Tragedy of Macbeth.
And joining us this week in Burnham Wood is Michael DeLuca. Michael is the publisher of Reckoning, a journal of creative writing on environmental justice. Also a writer himself, his short fiction has appeared in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Apex, Mythic Delirium, and more. His novella Night Roll was released in October of 2020. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, so I don't know you very well, but I met you through Reckoning because I have a story that is out in Reckoning issue number 6. And I would love it if you could talk to our listeners a little bit briefly here at the beginning about what Reckoning is as a magazine.
Reckoning is a journal of creative writing on environmental justice. That's the summary. People don't always know what environmental justice is, although these days I think it gets more and more familiar. When I started Reckoning in 2016, I was afraid there weren't going to be enough submissions, that not enough people would be into this topic, but the issues of concern there just keep growing, of course. And we're having no trouble with submissions. There's more every issue, so that's great. I don't know. To sum it up, environmental justice is the concept that the people responsible for the degradation of our natural world are not the people who are most affected by it, and attempting to reconcile those two things. So I live in southeastern Michigan, in between the city of Flint and the city of Detroit. And that was part of what influenced me as I was coming up with the idea for this. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard about the Flint water crisis, lead in the pipes.
Sadly.
Detroit was having some similar stuff, water shutoffs during the pandemic. So the time seemed ripe, 2016, Trump was about to come into office. So I was motivated to do something. I just sort of felt helpless, like I had done all the things that you expect a green hippie to do. I've got solar panels and an electric car and I garden and all this, and it just didn't feel like enough. So hence Reckoning. And it's been great. And your story, Luke, is awesome. It isn't out yet on the website, but I look forward to it appearing because I'm looking forward to hearing people react because I really enjoy it.
Thanks. Yeah, the title of that one is "What Good Is a Sad Backhoe," and it is. It's if you want to get the ebook, I think they can get that now on the website. But the physical copy will be coming out mid-year, and then my story is supposed to appear, I think, in October, if I remember correctly.
That sounds right. Yes, towards the end of the issue. I apologize about that, but we put
it's
really
all
good
right.
stuff
No,
at
it's
the
good.
end.
I'd be a closer, right?
Right.
Okay, so now we're talking about Shakespeare. That's what we got you on here for. You mentioned that you have some experience with Shakespeare, and particularly Macbeth, so I'd love to hear about that. Like, what is your track history with Macbeth?
Yeah, so I read it first in high school. I got sufficiently into Shakespeare, into the intellectual challenge of it. You guys were talking about this in the previous episode about learning to get your head around the language. And it really is like it's a journey into a place where you can understand him. And then once you're there, it's a lot easier, and it's sort of very tempting to go read another play because now you have the chops, you've polished those up, and if you forget and go away from Shakespeare for a while, you've got to do the work again. So I ended up taking 2 semesters of Shakespeare in college. I saw Macbeth performed in London.
Wow.
My future wife did her semester abroad there. It was a very stripped-down production. Everyone wore black pretty much. The set was black. There were swords. There were crowns, and I think that was it for props, really. She had bloody hands,
Yeah.
But Macbeth was Rufus Sewell, who I am a fan of.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I'm super jealous. I think I even mentioned on our last episode, I really want to see this performed like in a theater now.
Yeah, I'd love that. So you spoke about how you did listen to our last episode, and I'm a little nervous because, I'm not a Shakespeare expert, and like you were talking about, it was my first time reading it in a long time, and there was definitely a curve of me being able to even understand what was going on. But you're right on, because watching this movie, I was so glad we went through the process of reading it, because I was so ready to just appreciate the film for what it was and not have that stumbling block of figuring out what they're talking about. I did turn on subtitles so that I could follow the language, and that helped me. And then, and I could still feel myself evolving because I was like getting even more out of the words. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if you had the similar experience, James. But all that is to say, you're right on with that. And you listened to our last episode, so I'm hoping that we didn't get anything too wrong.
Yeah, hopefully we didn't butcher it. I definitely want to echo what you're saying. This idea that I sat down sort of expecting, expectations are funny, right? Like I sat down thinking we're getting a Joel Coens specifically adaptation, and I wonder if he's going to modernize it, make the dialogue a little easier to digest. But when I sat down and started watching it, he didn't. And It is from the page. And that was an adjustment period even in this film. The first 5 minutes or so, I was like, this is going to be an undertaking. This is a film that requires a certain level of concentration and really digging into it, which of course you want to do with every film. But I realized very quickly, 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, that it being performed helps immensely in being able to follow what's happening. The way that the actors are articulating their face and really performing and showing you with their face what's going on makes it a lot easier to follow. And midway through the movie, I didn't even think about the fact that they were speaking in this sort of language that they were.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the premise of your podcast is the book or the film better. This is a really hard question to take up with Shakespeare because
it really is.
It's the stage is expected there.
This is our first major play we've done, so our form breaks a little bit here, admittedly. Normally we're doing novels, which doesn't have that sort of intermediary, because this is intended to be viewed. So we'll talk about that when we get to the end. It's kind of a futile endeavor, and we can talk about that when we make our picks. But yeah, what was your experience like watching the tragedy of Macbeth? Had you seen it before you're watching it for this podcast, or was this your first time watching it?
I watched it twice in short order, once before and once after you invited me to do this. It's wonderful. It reminded me of that Rufus Sewell production I saw because it's not as stripped down. There are sets. There's a castle, but the mist that's constant sort of closes everything in, and it feels like it's a stage a lot of the time.
I think purposely so also, right?
Yeah.
The fog creates that illusion that you would get in a theater where they have the backdrop and the fog is to, give that sort of believability to it. And what an homage it was in that way.
I gather that he's making references to all these previous productions of Macbeth. I read this thing in the LA Times, a lengthy review from someone who is far more familiar with stage productions of Macbeth than I will ever be. And the filmed versions, apparently there's an Orson Welles version that he's specifically calling back, and I can't remember all the details, but...
Well, I have a feeling we're going to watch some of them in the future, because we tend to do that in our bonus episodes on Patreon. So we'll probably be watching some more Macbeth in our future. Yeah, that's really interesting, and I totally agree with what you guys are saying. I think there was a lot of choices made to deliberately evoke the stage, right? Like there was not an attempt to create a historic drama where people are just happen to be speaking like Shakespearean times, and instead they said, no, we're leaning into this is a production, this is drama. There's not a lot of like background characters. There's like you don't see like armies really at all in this. It's mostly just speaking roles, maybe a couple here or there, and the actors are front and center. The aspect ratio 4:3. It's black and white. There's a lot of stripped down things that have happened that to me drove my focus closer and closer to the performance. And that's what I assume the focus was and the purpose of doing that. But I'm definitely curious to know if there's any other theories about why they chose to go black and white and 4:3 ratio.
Oh, I have so many. So I'm going to get on my soapbox and talk about something that I've talked about many times. In film, one of the most revolutionary periods was the German Expressionist period. Films like that you study in history of cinema, those types of courses like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, some of these early German Expressionist films, it's really the template of what would become like a lot of modern horror and noir, and many of these aspects like start to show up over and over again. And some of those things are elongated architecture, which you get a ton of that in this movie. High contrast, super high contrast between the white and the black in this film. And so that was the first thing that hit me, was just like I was expecting it to be, as I realized it was going to be very theatrical, very stage-like. I thought it was going to be a lot of like medium shots and full shots and just like showing us the performances, but it showed off this weird space in a way that I wasn't expecting, in a way that brought back the idea of like, they have these architecture pieces where the walls are crooked, and the way that the lighting comes through can be unnatural at times, and the edges on a lot of the lighting is too sharp. The contrast between the line of where, because it can't happen like that naturally. There's a flood, like a sort of bloom that comes from lighting normally. And I was just geeking out about how this is one of the most visually striking movies I've seen. Definitely this year, maybe the last 5 years and beyond. And I love that with that, the Coens, and specifically in this case, Joel Coen, they're known for their noir. They're one of their first early successes was Blood Simple noir and kind of neo-noir. We talked about it with No Country for Old Men. They're taking the noir, they're taking the Western, they're blending these things together. And to see this whole full circle movement here, where Joel Coen is now making like a Macbeth adaptation inspired by what would inspire film noir, being German Expressionism, and the ways that it was just like, I was geeking out about like the film history within this. And a lot of it, we talk about it in many horror movies, like Dutch angles to your shots, and just this sense of, especially the fog, like all of these elements. It feels like he took a Macbeth adaptation and took all the tools that he's been developing throughout his career to deliver this like really unique film that I don't know anyone else could have delivered on in the same way.
Are you guys planning to watch, or have you already watched the Macbeth that was out a few years ago, starring Fassbender?
We're going to.
We're going to on Patreon, but we have not watched it yet.
I won't spoil it with my opinion of that or try and compare.
That's okay. I mean, you can give us a little taste, maybe.
I bailed out of that Fassbender version after about half an hour.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Because it was very heavy. And Macbeth is absolutely a horror story. And as you were talking about in your previous episode, high body count. No one goes into Macbeth expecting to be cheered. Not that I don't find it funny. The Porter's speech is always entertaining, no matter how many times I hear it.
Particularly good in this adaptation, too. Very, very funny performance by, I think, Stephen Root.
He's great. Anyway, the Fassbender version, I guess it felt plotting. It felt dense, deliberately trying to hit you over the head with the sense of menace. And I couldn't take it. Whereas this felt very poised, and all the choices seemed deliberate, and I was completely sucked in and wanted to watch it again.
We will have to be thinking about that when we watch that one, because I'm sure we're going to. So it'll depend on our appetite, maybe for the overbearing tone of that film. But yeah, I think. Do we want to get into some background information on the movie, James?
So in terms of choices that were made, I found some interviews and I read some things that Joel Coens spoke about. One of the things that I already talked about that I'll call back to is that I talked about that unnatural edge to a lot of the lighting. Like it would be shooting through like a skylight or through like an archway or something like that. It's very sharp. It looked unnatural to me, and I was like, what? The black in this film is so rich. It's such a pure black, and I'm trying to figure out how they're filming this with the lighting being so, because some of the lighting was so harsh. You can't just get that sort of black without having some residual light in your. It
was
black,
almost
basically.
a perfect black, because I have an OLED, and this is a perfect movie if anyone out there has an OLED to show off what makes OLED different. I think is because the black levels are so rich and black. Yeah.
Because what normally what a TV will do is they'll take all those different pixels, they artificially create black by shooting light through all the colors at the same time.
And it looks kind of gray.
Yep. And the best versions of that are able to get like somewhere close, but the OLEDs are true black. Like they just turn your screen black in that place.
Mm-hmm. Turn it off, basically. Turn the pixels off. Yeah.
Yeah, I found out within the set design that a lot of times they were actually painting black on the spots where it was supposed to be black as well. So like even if the light did hit it, that harsh edge was because that's the edge of a paint.
Wow. So it's not just shadow,
Wow.
it's painted black.
Exactly. So they're recreating the shadows, and it made for such a weird look, and I loved it so much. That's one really fun thing that I found. Some of the background, this was shot in 36 days, which was the shortest shooting Joel Coen had ever done. And most of it was completed several months after the start of COVID-19.
After the start. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So that had to be complicated.
And that's also notable because this entire movie, other than one shot at the very end of the movie that's sort of a single exterior, and it's more of an element than the whole shot. Everything is on a soundstage. This entire film was created on a soundstage. You know, during the pandemic, that like one location, small amount of crew, small amount of actors, things like that would be important. And just thinking of creating this in a soundstage and the set design and everything that they created, it's an immense undertaking, and then they shot it in 36 days. And it's, like I said, one of the most striking things I've ever seen. And so the way that he's deciding to have it all be in a soundstage gives it, what he says, it gives it an untethered from reality feel.
Agreed.
Because it makes it feel like it doesn't take place in our world, and it feels like the myth of Macbeth and what the story has become. It's outside of anything that could have ever happened, and it's almost like in a vacuum. So I thought that was really interesting to hear him talk about like that reasoning. Apparently, all the costuming and the sets, everything in the film that you see is almost all black and white.
Oh.
So in order to like really play up that contrast, costuming, like walls, everything is either black or white.
I would love to see some actual color
set
photography of the sets, because that would be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Apparently there were a few dresses worn by Frances McDormand that were colorful, but other than that, pretty much everything's very black and white.
Huh. Clever.
I would like to talk about how this possibly impacted my impression of the play. Is it time for that? Can I ramble?
Sure.
So yeah, the sense of isolation and specificity and the lack of decoration, the lack of the unnecessary. It feels like a stage. It also, to me, I think it was calling me back to Greek tragedy. I don't know if you guys have read much of that, but Greek tragedy is even more stripped down. They've got robes and masks and that's it. And they're on a stone stage. Mm-hmm. And there's the convention of the Greek chorus, where you get a scene and then the Greek chorus comes in and comments. And I was very aware in this movie how the witches function as a Greek chorus in a way that I have never been before, having seen and read this play many times. And I think that's partly due to the amazing acting choices of that woman who played all three witches, whose name I'm forgetting now. But
we got Catherine Hunter, who is spectacular. An absolute standout in this movie.
The standout for sure. In a film that has some of the best performances I've seen in a long time, the shining beacon for sure was her performance.
It was incredible when she, we're about to get to the start of the movie, when she shows up with those opening witch lines and the reveal of the toe. and or the thumb in the toe or whatever it was, and the way she was contorting her body, like I don't know, like she was a contortionist or something, like, and then but the acting that was happening while all of that was going on, it was unsettling and incredible, and I just want to show it to people. Like that alone is worth watching this movie, even though the rest of it's amazing. Like that scene is just so cool.
The way they used the reflection to make the other witches come out.
Oh my God, that was amazing. Yeah.
I was wondering if I was like, are they just going to go with one witch who speaks of herself in sort of a plurality? And then they kind of began that way, but then the reveal of the reflection, and then the reflection sort of comes into our world, I guess. And actually starts interacting, and then there's also this heavy implication that they are able to either transform into crows or are actually crows themselves. And I'm curious. So we read the play, but I feel like we probably missed some stuff. And I was unclear if we had missed certain things or if this movie was making some choices about certain, I guess I don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much, but there are certain implications about certain characters being behind certain things or taking certain actions that I didn't remember in the play, but maybe I just didn't pick up on it. So I'm going to be really curious to know, because it sounds like you've seen multiple adaptations of this, Michael, where this adaptation made some creative choices that are unique versus I've seen this kind of stuff in other places.
I have some answers for you about that.
Okay. It's a teaser, I guess.
We've talked about Joel Coen before. Typically, we talk about the Coens because this is his first directorial debut as just Joel Coen, not in partnership with his brother Ethan. And it's not that this is going to be what it is forever. I guess Ethan wanted to take a break and Joel wanted to explore different films. And they may come back together at some point. They may continue to work separately for a long time. But I thought that was really notable. And then, of course, like we know the Coens from movies like Raising Arizona, Fargo, Big Lebowski, No Country for Old Men, which we covered on the podcast, Inside Llewyn Davis. And typically, they're also the editors of their films. And that's the case here as well. There's another editor that worked with Joel Coen, but he wrote it, directed it, and edited this feature as well, which I always find to be just like the most precise vision possible from a director like this. And you're seeing somebody who could basically make any film they ever wanted to, and he made it one of the most difficult potentially, like tackling Shakespeare, and he did it with such style and in a way that I never would have thought possible.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good time to jump into summary here. I will read the first bit. Macbeth and Banquo, having led King Duncan's army to victory over the traitorous Thane of Cawdor, are approached by 3 witches on the battlefield. The witches hail Macbeth will be made the Thane of Cawdor. He's already Thane of Glamis. They proclaim that he shall be king hereafter before stating that Banquo shall father a line of kings. King Duncan orders the Thane of Ross to execute Cawdor and reinvest the title upon Macbeth. Macbeth becomes alarmed after Duncan names his son Malcolm as the Prince of Cumberland, seeing the appointment as an encumbrance in his path to the throne. Macbeth writes to Lady Macbeth, informing her of the prophecies. When Duncan decides to spend a night at Macbeth's castle, Lady Macbeth convinces her husband to commit regicide. She drugs the king's servants, and a hesitant Macbeth carries out the killing.
So, Michael, I think I'm going to let you start. Initial thoughts on the opening of this movie.
Well, as we've talked about, it's beautiful. The atmosphere is amazing. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. When you read that on the page, it is... in fiction writing, we talk about the reader is 50%. It's so much more with Shakespeare because in Shakespeare's time, in his setting, he was doing, 50% on top of the writing he'd already done. When you read that on the page, it took me at least 3 reads of the play to realize, there's weather. This play has weather.
Yeah.
And so to see Banquo and Macbeth coming out of the mist, going back into the mist, the witches appearing from the mist, it's unclear whether they're even really there physically. All that teaches me something about the play. And I would think if you'd never seen Macbeth or knew of it, it's still incredibly effective in the way of the expressionist film you're talking about. Is that the word?
German expressionism, yeah, expressionist.
I mean, so we start off, I think the first scene is Ralph Ineson as the captain coming to sort of give his report about the battle to King Duncan. And I just was struck with, I'm hearing these lines performed in a way that makes them make sense to me in a way that just didn't quite when I read them. And it's like, okay, he's given a battle report, right? And he's talking about what happened. He's talking about Macbeth and how he afforded himself on the battlefield. I love the line, "Unseamed him from knave to the chops." And fixed his head upon the battlements. So I'm like, okay, he's out there chopping people up. He's this fearsome warrior. And then we got Brendan Gleeson, who's another actor I am a fan of. But it's funny because I was like, is that Brendan Gleeson? And I couldn't quite tell until he spoke. And then the moment he spoke, I'm like, okay, that's who it is, because he has just such a distinct voice. And I thought that was a great scene. And then you follow that up immediately with this just spectacular scene of the witch being introduced, Catherine Hunter, who is just, I mean, it's got to be such a fun role to try and do, because you could just, there's no level at which you can't go, right? Like, you could just go to 1,000% and it's perfect for them. They're these wild witches that are beyond knowing and bizarre and off-putting, and God, just so much to grip you here early on. You're kind of seeing both sides of this. And that's before we get even Denzel even walks on screen.
So while we're talking about Catherine Hunter, I do want to mention that she's a pretty well-known theater actor and director as well. As an actor, she speaks a lot about how she plays a lot of male roles and how she loves that. She loves playing the male roles. She loves changing that over, and the way that she's plays this witch is like so gritty and like,
well, in the play they have like beards and stuff, so that totally fits with the almost like a non-binary gender of these witches.
Exactly. She's been described as this like virtuoso physical performer, physical theater. I think it's really amazing to see a performer like this in a film of this magnitude, right? We have some of the greatest living actors in this film. Frances McDormand is one of my favorite actors, period. In a film with all of these massive stars performing Shakespeare in roles that they've performed before. I know Frances McDormand has performed on stage for Shakespeare productions. Denzel has done a few as well, and also was in, what movie was that? It was like in the 90s.
Is it As You Like It? It's one of the comedies.
It is one of the comedies. I don't think it's As You Like It.
Directed by Kenneth Branagh. Much Ado About Nothing.
That's what it is. Yep, that is it.
I watched that recently and found it brutal, and I found Denzel's performance in it informative about his performance in this, because I think that his strategy in Shakespeare is to be transparent to he's like, I noticed it every time he's on screen with someone else in this movie. He's feeding them opportunities. He's not hamming it up. Like, whenever you are going to perform Shakespeare, I also have some very small drama experience. I performed a little Shakespeare once.
Cool. That's awesome.
It's like, are you going to try and make the meaning comprehensible to the modern audience, or are you going to do the beautiful words for what they are, or are you going to try and find some way in between those two things? And I feel like Denzel is always stepping back. He says all the explosive words without taking the stage away from Frances McDormand. It's amazing. I like him better as an actor now, having seen this movie, even though I've seen him in tons of things and was a fan already.
I think a lot of people want to take Shakespeare and take these like extreme, boiled down dramatic moments to show off them, right? They want to show off their performing chops. But like you said, Denzel is doing the work of performing it with a lot of gravitas, but also not making it about him. I also noticed that he sort of still keeps a lot of his Denzel mannerisms. Like, it's still Denzel performing this role of Macbeth, and I just found it to be so cool, and it felt so like real. It felt a lot more genuine to me than if he had tried to be some sort of like fake the Shakespeare. Like, I heard Joel Coen approach the actors and tell them that he didn't want any stick up your butt Shakespearean acting, And like I can tell that like he's like bring the genuine emotion and bring yourself to the role as well.
The moment that really exemplifies this to me that both of you are talking about, like, because I absolutely was taken with his performance because it was understated, and often he would choose to put the emphasis on lines that I didn't expect, and it was like the really big, memorable lines that I knew were coming. Often he would kind of fly through them with like an ease. And it's like, I think he kind of knows everyone knows these lines are coming, and he's going to give us a little something on something else. So a lot of interesting choices being made there, but then he gets the opportunities to do what the greats can do so well, and that's act with his eyes. And I thought the moment that stands out for me is when they're in the tent, and Malcolm is named, right, to be the prince. And the way he looks, like he's looking at Malcolm, and he's also looking at Banquo the same way. And that told me all I needed to know about Macbeth being jealous and being like viewing them as a obstacle to be overcome, because his avarice is just like is just inflamed, right? Like he wants to be king so much now that of course it's tragic because he's his own worst enemy. And that is fully displayed for me in this moment in a way where I had to kind of learn that by reading in the play. But like I knew that immediately. I was like, look at this guy and the way he's looking at these people. Like he's like, I want what you have.
As far as this section is concerned, I also definitely feel like we should talk about in Macbeth the play, the actual killing of the king is off screen, right?
Yes, we noted that. Yeah.
A significant change is to show it,
mm-hmm.
and showing it was very emotional. Like that, it was super, super intimate. They were like, he was like on top of him, and it's so like. I
mean, you got an actor like Denzel and Brendan Gleeson, you got to give him a death scene, right? Like otherwise, you're like, yeah, what are you doing?
And it was brutal. It was everything you would want it to be. Like I think Shakespeare leaves that scene off screen because the mystery of what we think happened. He showed it to us, and it was just as satisfying.
It's hard to divine Shakespeare's choices in things like that.
That's true. Yeah, who am I to say?
It's so far back in time and context, but that's something I love about seeing Shakespeare performed is he leaves all this room. You get one line of stage setting, and he asks you to fill in all this stuff. Yeah. Or we're asked by the mist of history to fill in setting and how people move. And that's the director's choices and the actor's choices. And I loved seeing that scene wordlessly because I know it's not in the play.
Mm-hmm.
This has been introduced to change the way we react to the characters. And it works beautifully. And when we get to Ross has a lot of stuff like that. And is very mysterious in the play on the page.
I really want to talk about Ross. So before we get to Ross, that murder scene, I thought it was really clever that they have one of the men who's been drugged mutter amen at Macbeth, because you're introducing a moment that is hinted at perhaps, but isn't actually in the play. It is talked about it happening before, but we're seeing it sort of happen after he's already killed the king, which my understanding was before that all happened, he was saying his prayers with the guards and he was unable to say amen. So I wasn't clear, but then it kind of made this implication that maybe he had been witnessed, for one, and then two, you're able to add a line that still feels authentic to the play because it is a line that is referenced, right? So it was a really clever way of adding a scene that still feels wholly Shakespeare. I don't know. I was giving him props for finding a way to do that because it's so hard to edit Shakespeare, right? Because this has been around for hundreds of years. How dare you edit Shakespeare in any way? And yet you're finding little ways to do it.
I think Macbeth is one of his hardest things to do that with.
There's less of it, right? It's a very short play.
Yeah, there's so much less. So like you watch a Hamlet, they can't put all of Hamlet in a movie, people would fall asleep,
Yeah.
But Macbeth doesn't. You really have to work, as you guys were talking about in the previous episode. Like, I had to read through to figure out people's motivations. Like, do Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, did they have a kid? Is that kid dead now? I have given suck. It's
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
but you have to extrapolate. And that is part of why I was reacting to this in the context of Greek tragedy this time, I guess, because he comes on stage full of... No, that's not true. He comes on stage, and we get a scene where he's a weary warrior, spattered in blood, walking home, and then immediately in the next scene, he is infused with greed and aspirations to power. And there's the transition is all in the hands of the witches.
Yeah, it really feels like they know that this is going to do this to him. Again, I was wondering, is this a revenge from the witches? Have they in this opening conflict somehow wronged the witches and come into their territory, and now the witches want to take revenge on Macbeth because giving him this prophecy is a curse that will haunt him to the end of his days, ruin his life, and ruin everything he cares about. And that seems to be one of the subtexts of this and the themes of this play is foreknowledge in this sense can be the worst thing you can have, because knowing that he is to be king is a death sentence for Macbeth. So the other thing, you mentioned Ross, and we got to talk about Ross. So in the play, I didn't make much of Ross at all, and maybe I missed it, but I thought Ross was just a guy. He has some cool lines. He's somebody who works for Macbeth, I guess, or he's involved in Macbeth's dealings a lot. And then Ross in this movie is so creepy and sort of aloof, and then he's cousins with everybody, and he's at every event. I think he was even at some events that I'm not sure if he's at in the play by the text. And then there was some implication jumping ahead that maybe he was responsible for the death of Lady Macbeth. At least that's the way I read it. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the choices that were made with Ross as a character. And have you seen anything like this in other productions of Macbeth, or is this unique to this movie?
I have not seen anything like it, but according to that LA review, it has been done in some other prominent production.
That shouldn't surprise me.
and that this is a question that plagues Shakespeare scholars. What's Ross doing? Is he a stage manager character, which Shakespeare uses a lot? I got this whole sidetrack about how and why and when Shakespeare breaks the fourth wall. It's all the time. And some of it is for political reasons that we can gather by looking back at what his relationship with Queen Elizabeth and then James I was. So at the end of The Tempest, Prospero breaks his staff, and we're supposed to read that as, I'm done performing for you people. And I see that in Macbeth much more now, having been a huge fan of King Lear and The Tempest. Later works, coming back to this, I see him doing it in a more subtle way that I didn't recognize in the past.
Making a political statement, you're saying?
A bunch of things. I mean, breaking the fourth wall. Okay, so he's talking to the audience. He's like, wink, wink, this is a play. We're communicating through a piece of fiction. There are ways that I can remind you that I'm here, that I, Shakespeare, have arranged this for a purpose.
So in that sense, Ross could almost be a Shakespearean Shakespeare stand-in. He is
right.
Kind of the playwright. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
I mean, that figure is in a lot of his plays. Prospero is totally that.
Yeah.
There's this bit in King Lear where I believe it's Edward is that character's name, where he's leading the blinded Lear along the cliffs of Dover, and he pretends that he's fallen off. He gets Lear to believe that he has fallen off the cliffs and survived. And it's basically Shakespeare being like, look what I can do. This is how plays work. I made you get caught up in this story. The way Joel Coen keeps showing us Ross just watching, I feel like Ross is stage managing, but he's also us. He's also the conscience.
But he's so creepy sometimes. To me, he almost felt menacing. Is that our desire to see the violence play out too? If he is some sort of audience kind of stand-in, because
that's a fascinating question.
He is not benevolent, right? He at times it feels like he is a harbinger of doom. Like when I saw him arrive at Lady Macduff's house, I was like, oh, it's going to go down, you know? Like, I don't know, like, I guess I kind of knew it was going to, but he just felt scary to me. And his robes and his figure evoked almost like a Grim Reaper image to me.
Yeah, totally. With the way his cuffs hang down, it's so striking. Like, just the costume choices make my eyes drawn to him in a way that cannot be unintentional. You know, it's all so deliberate.
There was a lot of this in the film, but he got, I think, most of these scenes where the performer is looking directly to camera.
This is Alex Hassel, by the way. We should probably name him because he did a great job.
Yeah, incredible. And I'm not super familiar with his work either. Like
he is a familiar face. I'm not sure what he's been in, but I've seen him in something.
Yeah. So he kept having these moments where he'd like walk, you know, it's like a reaction shot. Like, for example, there's the moment when Banquo and Fleance are like running away, and he lingers and waits. And there's this just shot of his face and him like thinking, and you're trying to get into the mind of this character. And I love how it's so ambiguous until the ending, at least.
Yeah, which man, we're gonna have to talk about the ending because I'm very curious to know your take on that. But maybe are we ready for maybe some more summary so we can get some more scenes here?
Early next morning, Macduff, the Thane of Fife, discovers the body, while Macbeth murders the servants to tie up loose ends. Fearing for his own life, Duncan's heir Malcolm flees to England, and Macbeth assumes the throne as the new king. Uneasy over the prophecy concerning Banquo, Macbeth arranges to have him and his son Fleance murdered. Macbeth's assassins, accompanied by Ross as the third murderer, kill Banquo. Ross then pursues Fleance through a field. An increasingly paranoid Macbeth becomes a feared tyrant. At a royal banquet, he hallucinates and begins raving at Banquo's ghost. Lady Macbeth has the guests dismissed before drugging him to calm him down. During his trance, Macbeth is again visited by the witches. They conjure a vision of Fleance, who tells him to beware of Macduff, that he shall be king until great Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane Hill, and that he shall be harmed by no man born of a woman. Macbeth orders the whole Macduff household be put to death, but Macduff himself survives, having earlier fled to England.
I found the aesthetic of this film, just 'cause I don't think I've weighed in on that yet. It's so modern in a way that is like, it clashes with what I was expecting from this like middle-aged, tale, to see like almost modern architecture and modern and stripped bare designs. And of course it's stagey, but it's also futuristic almost at times, and kind of like an MC Escher painting, in the way that you kind of warp perspective, and that's also fascinating. And they're all choices that make it seem brutal and evocative and otherworldly, because this is not a reality that exists, right? Like, this is not something that has ever occurred in our history, and yet it feels so perfect. I don't know, for this subject matter.
To take a film that clearly is an homage to theater and is really evoking stage work in general, and then to use camera techniques that are so abnormal to that setting, right? So like, you're getting these like bird's eye views, these things that you don't get in a play normally. I felt to be really interesting. It's like taking the medium and using it well, even though you're in the context of stages and trying to sell it as even like the backdrops, like everything is all stage. But then you're using the camera techniques that you would assume to see in, any modern day, well, really, honestly, super well crafted, obviously, filmmaking. But a lot of these like wides that they have, symmetrical.
Oh, so much symmetry in this movie.
Beautiful transitions. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth had their heads against each other in a wide, and then this transition into like some sort of like wide shot of like landscape.
That fits really well how I go into Shakespeare. We were talking about this earlier, the difference between the page and the stage in the film. Everyone has many of these lines in their head, and I expect a Shakespearean actor to come to a speech like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and be like, I have to say this in a different way than any actor has ever said it before. I'll just emphasize a few things differently to put my stamp on it, to shake the audience off of their expectations. Like, you can't perform Shakespeare and not engage with the expectations because it's such well-trodden material. He's the greatest English language writer. Everyone agrees, So
real quick, do you give any credence to the theories that maybe Shakespeare wasn't a real person or a front for several other people or anything like that?
I like the version where he's Christopher Marlowe. I like the version where Christopher Marlowe, throws him some stuff at the beginning before Christopher Marlowe dies. It's fun. I'm more or less in agreement with your opinion from your previous episode. I enjoy thinking about it occasionally. I'd rather not let it color my appreciation of the work because I like the work so much. And I have this version of Shakespeare in my head who's winking at me all the time.
Yeah.
I want that to be real, and I don't really care if it's not. So
interesting to think about. Sorry, I feel like I threw you off your point you were making.
The surprise. I mean, I think that the camera choices he's making emphasize and reflect that expectation that we're going to have our expectations challenged or we're going to be bored. Because we all have a version of that tomorrow and tomorrow's speech in our heads, and if the actor doesn't break from it, then it's almost like we weren't even listening to it. We could have just been reading it on the page. So I think when the camera comes down from above in the second bit with the witches, where there's this super weird beam that gets a ton of screen time, and the heads are rising out of this vast pool, the color of lead, so good. It just it throws us all off, and we have no idea what to expect, and it makes the material feel fresh.
Another moment of challenging expectations we're thinking that although this is a stagey version of an adaptation, a film of Macbeth, there is the moment where Banquo comes and gives a monologue or soliloquy and we spotlight him just as you would as if it was on stage. And doing that is again calling attention to the fact that you're watching a movie, but it's still a play. And I loved that moment where he came and delivered the speech. It was soon before the assassins came after them, I believe. And then this amazing transition where it's all darkness behind him, like I said, that really rich black. And then he's speaking, and then it sort of fades into the scene, I think, with him and Fleance leaving. I believe that's what it was.
Was that in that room that has the circular open? Because there's kind of a room with a circular opening, and it's where Macbeth later meets with the assassins. And such a fascinating set. And because the light that comes through it is a spotlight that they can use to spotlight people at times. And I wasn't sure if that was, because I think he was still at the manor, right? At that time? I could be wrong. But that might have been a way to use, you're using the architecture of this room you've created to create a stage effect of a spotlight. Oh, so I wanted to revisit a little bit the 4:3 ratio. And I want to press you on it a little bit more. So to me, I see 4:3, and my initial thought is, old tube televisions that couldn't give us the ratio that we would get in theaters, or if they did, it was squished because you'd have to give these big black bars, and so to me, for the longest time, 4:3 felt like a television, because you would get television that would only be shot in that ratio or only displayed in that ratio. But here it was okay, that is not what's happening, because it felt like it really focused me in on performance, focused me in on what was being shown. My eyes couldn't wander in the way that I'm used to, because we have so many hugely wide ratios these days and expansive shots, which are beautiful. And you have this massive landscape or something where your eye can wander from left to right to left, what have you. And you can look at all these little different details. And instead we have a stripped down set, we have a tight focus, we have no color, and there was only a few things to look at any given time, but I ended up looking at them for longer. And I'm curious if you think is that the reason you do this? Is there something I'm missing? And did it have a similar effect on both of you? I'm curious, Michael and James, or anything else like that. What did you think of the ratio?
It definitely had the effect you're describing on me, and now that you articulate it, I think you're right that my expectations of 4:3 have changed since my TV is no longer 4:3, and it's been a while.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about it until now, but so there were black bars on the other two sides of the screen as I watched this movie, and it's emphasizing the claustrophobia and this. I have in my notes about how Macbeth is a railroad plot. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that term. It's like a criticism that is applied to fiction, meaning it's hard to believe that all these events fell into place this succinctly and this intensely. Like, it just builds one thing on top of another. And, there are terms for the emotional effect of that.
I think being on the rails is like the main thing about that. It makes me think of, it's like there is a rail and you're on it and you can't deviate, and that's not normally a good feeling to have in a plot. But it's Macbeth.
But it's like it's a hallmark of this play, and
it feels fated. So maybe that ties into that theme.
I'm going to get pretty nerdy with you guys about this aspect ratio stuff because
because I was going to say, this isn't the only movie doing this. There's other movies that are doing this, right?
So first thing, it's not actually 4:3. It's actually 137:1, which is Academy aspect ratio. And it's like it's a 35 millimeter. It's a holdover from film, like a 35 millimeter film. My frame of reference for doing this is the Coens calling back to things that they fell in love with when they fell in love with filmmaking. So I've heard them speak about the things that inspired them was a lot of, and really that generation of filmmakers were really versed in films and just like had a great understanding of films, because some of the greatest films of all time were being put on television. They watched things like Citizen Kane. They watched all these amazing films that are like hallmarks of the industry. So they're one, calling back to the history of film, and two, I don't know how often you guys have seen like different formats of projection, but basically IMAX 70 millimeter is like the golden standard of projection at this point. IMAX 70 millimeter is more of a box than you think.
Okay.
It's more square than you would think. It's not quite a square, but and when you get that, a lot of filmmakers shoot like that, and so that you have the vertical room. Because you get a lot more in the image here. So like people like Christopher Nolan does it. And it's a lot about the immersiveness of so I think you were picking up on it, Luke, but you were thinking it was because it was limiting the amount that you're seeing, but it's actually expanding what you're seeing directly in front of you. And it actually gives you a more immersive picture, maybe not peripherally, but in terms of what you're looking at vertically. And I think that whole thing is because some filmmakers feel that they want more, because if you look at a widescreen image, you're getting like from top to bottom, you're getting that range, you're getting that 16:9 kind of thing, not in theaters, but 16:9 is what people have on their phones and computers and TVs and everything. And in terms of this film, I think those large, long, looming shadows, looming architecture, you're getting a lot more of that vertical space. When we're looking down into, like you're talking about the hole that was like sort of cut out for the light, we're looking down at that scene that feels like so much more elongated when you have it almost in a more of a square aspect ratio. So
that makes sense.
That's my take on it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Wow, didn't know that. Cool. So what specific scenes have we missed here that we want to talk about? I know there's some big stuff that we just went over, including the death of entire families. What were your thoughts maybe on that? Let's go with Lady Macduff and her child and that harrowing scene when Ross shows up and then disappears before the violence really takes off, and we see a child get chucked, which I thought was notable. Yeah. Thrown into the smoke. That may have been the hardest thing to get through for me in this movie, was that kid getting launched. I mean, so it was so bad, but like I laughed at it because it was so kind of over the top too. So like I don't know, like it's like I either had to be maybe like emotionally haymakered with it or find it kind of humorous, and I ended up going into humorous. Maybe that says something about me, but because I could just see the like padding underneath the mist as this kid goes into there. I don't know, I thought it was kind of funny looking, but it worked. That was just my reaction to it. It's interesting that you had the opposite. It sounds like it was harrowing for you. Well, yeah, I have a 5-year-old, and that probably changes, as I've heard is the case with other parents, like my ability to take kids in jeopardy has completely changed. So like that scene, and also the bit where Banquo gives Fleance his sword and then takes it back, I was bolted onto those very brief moments because I'm a parent, I think. But also that, like, I think they're both pretty cool instances of directing choices, acting choices, staging choices. On the page, I thought that scene with
son of Macduff and Lady Macduff made out the son to be wittier and snarkier than his years. He certainly seemed older on the page than he did in the film. And when I was reading it, I read what that kid says to his mom as, this is Shakespeare talking in the voice of this character to us. And I did not get that from the film because he's younger and he's cute. And I'm so steeling myself to watch him die.
Yeah.
I guess is another.
I feel like a monster now.
I mean, I can understand from a technical perspective why you thought it looked funny. You know what I mean? Because it was that sort of callback to like early effects, like special effects that you're going to do when you kill somebody on screen or whatever. It's just like a foggy room. Like it's literally just like a foggy shot with nothing below. You can't see anything, and then you just see a child fall.
It was just so unexpected too, and when really unexpected things happen to me, sometimes my reaction is to laugh. I thought he was gonna stab him or something, and instead he throws him, which I don't know. It just caught me off guard.
And this is off screen, off stage, really in the play as well, right? Like this.
Actually, wait, no, I think they kill the kid on stage, right?
The
Am I
kid
wrong
does
about
die.
that?
I thought that maybe the mom dies and the kid. I don't remember. I know they both die, but I can't remember how it's described. I thought it was sort of off.
I think the kid gets to say something like, "Mother, I am slain." Did he say that
Oh,
in the
really?
film version?
I don't think so.
I don't
I mean,
think so,
he would have been yelling
Yeah.
it as he sailed through the air,
Luke would have laughed even
which would
harder.
have made me
then.
laugh even harder.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
I did think that the scene was very emotional though, because of the build up with Lady Macduff, and then it hits so much harder when Macduff learns about the death of his family later. Like it hits hard because we saw it, and you saw the cuteness of the kid. We saw, how great they were together. I definitely think we have to talk about the trance because we get some special effects and some other really interesting and cool things. And then within the context of this story, like seeing Macbeth and how he reacts to it, and the way that the visions come about, because in this vision he meets again with the witches, and this time they summon forth. They do the what's the toil?
Double toil and trouble.
There it is.
Fire burn and cauldron bubble.
That's the one. Yeah, and man, I was waiting for the scene, right? Like it's such an iconic. Maybe, I don't know, that was like the one scene I knew from Macbeth without even having read it, because I just heard it referenced so many times. And I'm waiting for this to happen, and yeah, filling a room and having it be so surreal, and it's like maybe he's dreaming or hallucinating. And then the room itself just keeps changing, and they do this several times in the movie, where all of a sudden, like the roof is open and you have these beams, and I was unclear whether or not that was normally the case in this room. Really fascinating choices being made, and then the way it plays out with Fleance rising from the liquid, that's different by the text of the play, right? Like the visions are slightly changed here, and the vision was said to be the like master, which there's like this other Hecate or whatever in the play that we don't see. I don't think we see it all here.
No.
And the implication is that maybe Fleance, who's coming out of the liquid, is...
Yeah, I mean, from a fantasy writer perspective, is it that they are priests, like in D&D, where they summon their deity, and the deity does the magic on their behalf?
Yeah.
Well, that sort of makes it less fun, because I want to give those witches agency.
Yeah, it makes the witches cooler. Like, it makes them the power here, which I do like. I do appreciate that change. And again, you're editing a little bit here, right? And it's very difficult to do, but you're finding ways to change the supernatural element ever so slightly by doing that.
Changing it slightly to fit your vision, and yet not changing it to the point that you or I are reacting viscerally to it. Like, oh, that's such a big change that I can't get on board with it. I think it's very smart changes.
Yeah, very cool scene.
All right, so I'm going to finish out the summary with this section here. A guilt-ridden Lady Macbeth begins sleepwalking and gradually descends into madness. Ross secretly visits England and informs Macduff of his family's demise. A grief-stricken Macduff vows revenge, while Malcolm raises an army with English help. The troops cut down branches from Burnham Wood, using them as camouflage, and march on Macbeth's castle at Dunsinane, fulfilling one of the prophecies. Lady Macbeth dies, plunging Macbeth into further despair. Still convinced of his invincibility, he is ultimately challenged by Macduff to a duel. Macduff declares he is not born of a woman, but instead untimely ripped. Macbeth initially refuses, but ultimately accepts Macduff's challenge. Macduff bests Macbeth and beheads him, fulfilling the final prophecy. Malcolm is crowned the new king of Scotland. Meanwhile, Fleance is revealed to be alive, and Ross spirits him away from Scotland. A flock of crows emerges in the foreground, clearing the path and to signal the fulfillment of the witch's prophecy regarding Banquo's progeny.
Can we talk about the death of Lady Macbeth?
Yeah.
Important moment.
Because you said you got the impression that Ross was responsible.
He might have
and I did not.
Interesting, yeah, because I had been seeing him as this Grim Reaper figure who was showing up at all these moments where people were dying, and he wasn't present to my memory in the play when I read it. Yet they had him walk up and look up at Lady Macbeth, who's at the top of the stairs, alive, and he looks at her and has this moment of like, maybe if she were to die, that would spell the end to this. Because at this point, it sounded like he was on the side of Malcolm, right? And so, could he have pushed? Was my thought. It is ambiguous, clearly, because we don't see it happen, and so unclear whether or not he did. But the character as the Ross as portrayed in this movie, I felt capable of it. I don't know.
I think a lot of that is the filmmaker trying to question his motives, like have the audience question his motives, right? Like, so I don't know, because I didn't necessarily read it either as him doing it. I just thought that he saw something. Maybe he saw like her in turmoil or whatever and decided to do nothing, because he keeps showing up in these key scenes and deciding to do something or deciding to do nothing. Like there's the scene that we kind of glossed over where he follows into the field after Fleance and like stands over him.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, which is another. What was like,
you don't know what happened there.
No,
like,
it's revealed later that maybe he like kind of secreted him off, but I was unclear on what exactly was happening there.
But I think it's just on the part of the filmmaker trying to keep that mystery alive for that character. I didn't really.
So even if he did see her in peril and chose to do nothing, it's kind of a Walter White moment of murder. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, at the end of this story, we see that it seems like although he may have been working for Macbeth, he didn't actually kill anybody that Macbeth asked him to, did he? I think he just showed up in those situations, never actually killing anyone. And then it seemed like at the end, by taking Fleance away, seemed like ultimately he was more invested in keeping Fleance safe, and he felt like that was the right way for Scotland to go rather than Macbeth. So I think he saw the error of Macbeth earlier on.
Or I feel like his motives are more strange than that. Yeah. It might be more tied to that role he's playing as like a fourth wall breaking character, like Michael was talking about. Like
we're all not able to do anything, but we're just watching it happen.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we were meant to feel responsible in a sort of like Schrodinger's box kind of way. You're watching this, so you must own these sins. That's kind of what I get from, Ross showing up right before Macduff's entire family is murdered, then showing up. First, he can't bear to tell Macduff. He's like, oh, your family's fine. Actually, they've all been murdered.
Yeah, what a twist. That's such an interesting way to break the news.
Because of what you guys said about the side characters in this play not being very well developed in your previous podcast episode. Partly because of that, partly because Ross is just such a weird and fascinating character in the movie. I went back and looked at every single appearance and everything he says in the text. Like I went through it a couple of times trying to figure out where is Ross right now? Where is he supposed to be? And where's Joel Coen deciding he's been? And in some cases, I could not figure it out. How does he get from Dunsinane to Fife and back in the course of 2 scenes?
Agreed.
I don't know how far apart these places are.
Yeah. No, he's like in England at one point too. I think he's
right.
magic, right? Like this character is somehow otherworldly. Is my read on it. Like he's in multiple scenes strung together at different locations, back to back, and there's no way, because I think it transitions from him being at there to. I mean, it's like, okay, maybe he could have traveled in between scenes, but like the language of a film tends to tell me that he shouldn't be able to be in the next scene because he's somewhere else, and yet he was.
Can we talk about the fact that he leaves Fleance with the old man, who is also the same actor that plays the witches?
Right.
So,
right.
Is there some sort of like service being performed for the witches?
Yeah, I think so. So this is all going to get to the ending, which I think is the another final moment of ambiguity where we're sort of trying to figure out, because it is Ross who's on the horse and with Fleance and with the witch as old man, right? We see them interact, and then he rides off, and then he bursts into crows. And that made me question everything. And again, I was getting the sense that maybe he was somehow otherworldly, and I started wondering, is there any chance that he's a witch? That he's one of the witches in some sort of guise?
It's definitely possible, yeah.
I don't know. I was really curious, actually. That was like one of the main things I wanted to talk to you about and like see what your read is with that, because I felt like the movie was trying to tell me something when it comes to Ross, and I'm just not sure what it is.
I do not read him as a witch or supernatural, but I'm so very inclined to the breaking the fourth wall thing. I just get a lot of fun and inspiration out of that. I feel like engaging with those ideas was instrumental in my becoming the kind of writer I am. But okay, so apparently this is a point of contention among people who direct Macbeth. What do you do about the third murderer?
Yeah, I had that question reading it. It felt like a dangling thread. Like, who is this? Why is this important that a third murderer had shown up? Unclear.
Yeah. There's the delightful interpretation that you guys introduced me to, which I don't think I'd ever heard before, about maybe this is an incomplete play and there were other bits of it. The first folio was lost. I forget all the details of that.
Yeah.
Or as a person who wants to reify Shakespeare and make him into something he couldn't possibly have been, I want him to have left us that just so that hundreds of directors and actors through the generations will be like, what do we do about this? What does it mean? And apparently Coen is engaging with some sort of tradition of what do we do with that third murderer? Do we make him Ross? Do we make it Macbeth? Apparently other directors have chosen to make it Ross. And so me reading through his lines a bunch of times all consecutively, I'm looking for the character transition, because in the early scenes, Ross seems like he's supportive of Macbeth, like, you're a hero, you saved the day. And then I was trying to find in what scene did I think he had changed his mind, and surprise, it's the Banquo's ghost scene.
Yeah. I mean, he also is the figure who is looming over the sons of King Duncan when they are deciding to flee, right? That's Ross up there. He's in this kind of balcony area, and he's just watching them. And again, like, there's something, even if he is only, even if it is just the fact that he's this fourth wall breaking character, in fiction, to be a fourth wall breaking character makes you kind of magical, because you are aware you are in fiction, like you're Deadpool a little bit, right? Like, so that is itself a power.
Yeah, totally.
And so even that alone makes him kind of magical.
I gotta say, I love the idea of Shakespeare, like, trying to challenge the generations to come, like keeping us sharp,
Yeah,
keeping us on our toes, making us think outside the box.
Yeah, you figure it out.
He wrote that into his play.
Leave a little white space for him to play with. They'll really wonder on that one.
When Ross meets with this old man in the cottage, I did not notice this. This is something I found in my reading. The character sings the first verse of a song that ends with the line, "For the rain, it raineth every day." And supposedly the lines are not from Macbeth, but from an earlier Shakespeare comedy, Twelfth Night.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that was very interesting to think about the reinterpretation, and like, it's like how
introducing lines from another play that's a bold choice.
How specific he was to bring in the actual dialogue and bring in all of this from Macbeth, and then to have that in there. It's very interesting. I want to like hear the song again to understand the whole context of like, why drag that in and drop it into Macbeth.
Is it possible that this was a popular bar song? Rains of Castamere?
Yeah.
Yeah. the popular bar song, Prince of Castamere.
Right. Wedding song, famous wedding song.
When you start busting that one out, I think everyone gets a little nervous. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting moment, but I do not have any theories to give you, James, as to why, other than it is cool to, like, if you're going to bring in lines from somewhere else, you're not going to write them yourself, so you got to lift them from another Shakespeare play, because if you try and write some Shakespearean lines, it's going to be obvious and everyone's going to, be upset. So that's a clever way to introduce something new, because you're like, oh, well, at least the same guy wrote it, in theory. So a moment I got to talk about, and it's one of the things that has stuck with me most from watching this movie, is Macbeth. Lady Macbeth has died, which do we give her enough credit yet for her, outdamned spot and her sleepwalking scene? Maybe we should focus on that for a moment before I get to what I was going to talk about. She is great in that, and we have the doctor and the servant sort of watching and commenting, and then there's even this moment where at the very end she turns and looks at them and says, "To bed," I think, and I got this like implication like she knew she was being observed. And I thought that was an interesting twist on the scene that I wasn't sure if that was in the text of the play again, because that kind of gives her a little more agency here than I had previously thought. I don't know. What was your take on that moment?
Any opportunity to complicate like that gets me excited.
Yeah.
Frances McDormand's overall effect on me in this movie is informed by Fargo. Wow. And I wince a little bit about it because I want to assign more credit to Frances McDormand as opposed to just the casting choice. But the character in Fargo is iconic, and for me in particular, I mean, it's a touchstone, and there's something in common there in the fact that she is a woman in a man's role, surrounded by this ultraviolence, who keeps an even keel to an extent. But you see the craziness in her acting choices in Fargo. And I really felt like I was being called back to that when she was doing the outdamned spot. Because she's asked the devil or whoever to unsex her, and she's relentless. She does not have a moment of empathy for the first 3 acts, and then now she's fragile.
Yeah, it's to me it was clearly in this film, at least, the killing of Macduff's family is what seems to be the straw that breaks her. Up until then, she was fine with any amount of blood, and then in this film, at least, it was clear to me that that's the moment that she is no longer on board, and truly pushes her over the edge. And she realizes, I think, what she's done to her husband, because our read of the play was like she continued to drive him towards this and to push him and to call his masculinity into question when he had doubts, and to use everything she could to sort of push her husband into murder. And then now she's like, I don't know about this. And I felt like it was kind of abrupt in the play when she changed, but I guess I followed it a little better in the film.
Yeah, I did mention before that she's like one of my favorite actors, but this performance, I love the way that Denzel and Frances McDormand play off each other in that role, because it is so contentious at times, and then they're like on the same side, and the way that she just approaches the role, she's just incredible. The outdamp spot, and then the like we talked about, the scene with her on the stairs and speaking with the doctor and everything, like just amazing stuff. Really good.
You make me want to correct myself, actually, because I said that she's without mercy or sympathy for those first 3 acts, but it is plain to me that she loves Macbeth and that they have an actual relationship, and that's all Frances McDormand. I mean, and it's Denzel being quiet and letting her do the work, giving her room to work. Like I've not believed a loving, supportive relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth ever before in a production of this I've seen.
Wow. That's high praise. Yeah, I think they really pulled it together and had like I think this movie overall, within the zeitgeist of like in the history of Macbeth, is going to be a touchstone. I think the witch scene is something that people will point to. That will be in people's minds as they read the story, I think, going forward, if you've seen the film. And then I think I think the relationship between these two, it made more sense to me in this film than it did in the original play, reading it on the page.
So important to nail. I want to introduce another scene that I think is going to, at least for me, is going to stick with me and is going to be an iconic. And that is everything has fallen apart for Macbeth. His wife is dead. His castle is being sieged. And he sort of just wanders into his throne room after throwing open the window and letting all these leaves in. And he collapses in his throne. And we get this character show up to fight him. His name, what's the name of the character here? Seward? Right. Seward shows up and sees him, and they have this exchange where he's like, "What's your name?" He's like, "I know your name," and then they say your name, and he says, "Thou be afraid to hear it." And like the way he described it was so badass. Like it was like I don't know. I just loved Denzel in this moment, and it felt iconic to me. The idea of like someone's arrived to call you out, and you are at your blackest moment, yet like you are, this person is not a threat to me, and you have accepted that you are basically the devil. And he's calling you the devil, and you're like, you don't have the bravery to stand up to the devil, and I know that. And just the way he delivers these lines to this guy struck me as just like, I don't know, absolutely incredible. And then they fight in a way that is so interesting because he has no weapon. He fights him barehanded. He gets his face cut, and then he throws the blood in his eyes, gives him this powerful shove, like very cool. A sort of choreography for the fight itself. And I kept thinking about Elden Ring, a video game I've been playing recently, and how in that game and other Souls games, you wander into a forgotten throne room, and there's a slumped figure of a king waiting for you. Who knows how long it's been there, and you wake him up, and when you wake him up, they tend to be like, you don't know what the fuck you just got into. And then they kill you, is usually what happens. And I felt like that's exactly what happened to Seward here. He was not ready for the fire he was about to meet. I love that. I love that moment.
That'll be a good a touchstone for everybody. Like I don't know that Macbeth has been compared to Elden Ring until
right?
now, but now it has. We checked that box.
Another thing I noticed in that fight is the walls like go away, and we see the forest as he's like fighting, and I don't know, that's really interesting, right? Like the surreal moment of they're like fighting in a forest while in the throne room.
Yeah,
I hadn't given thought to the forest appearing, but I want to because the Birnam Wood bit is something that like filled me with the mystery of this play when I first read it long ago. They offer me an actual fantastical moment. And was it you guys who said that Tolkien was influenced by this in creating the Ents? Right. So that's all. This is my wheelhouse. Talking trees, walking trees that take revenge on people.
Yeah, that's why I made you from Birnam Wood in your intro. I don't know if you caught that.
Thank you. I did catch that, and I appreciate it. So yeah, like what does the wood mean? What does its appearance in that scene mean? Its wildness, which I think is, the inevitability of death. Is it associated with the witches in some way? Yeah. Its fate.
You know what it also reminds me a little bit, and I don't know if this was deliberate or not, but like in samurai films, you often get these showdowns and these duels under the sort of rose blossoms falling from a tree, right? Like that's a very iconic shot. And you had these leaves were swirling through the entire battle. And I don't know if that was some sort of deliberate choice or that's just like some parallel things going on there.
Well, I mean, from Kurosawa is like the master of motivated motion in the scene, and having something like that, having like cherry blossoms fall through the scene, or rain, something like that. Like these are elements that he loved to put in really dramatic scenes, because giving that extra movement in a scene where maybe other things are still, like makes for really striking visuals.
Yeah.
Do I recall that Kurosawa did an interpretation of Macbeth that, wasn't called that? He
Throne of Blood, yeah.
told it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool.
Which is another thing I guess we'll cover for a bonus episode or something.
No, we
got to
cover Kurosawa on the main feed.
Oh,
at
we
some
will,
point.
but I just mean like, so how do we cover Throne of Blood as Macbeth? Because
is it Macbeth?
I believe so.
Okay, I don't know. We'll look into it. I thought there was maybe another one. Yeah, but then we get after Denzel does his like badass, like, what is that movie he was in, Equalizer or something? I was like, okay, here's Equalizer Denzel just like taking this guy apart. Oh, because when he finishes him, he does this kind of spin. He takes his sword away from him, stabs him in the back of the neck with his own dagger, and like walks out without even looking at him. I was like, this is such a like badass action moment for this movie that hasn't had any of this up until now. It was, really fascinating that they threw it in there, but it was very cool. And yeah, so then they walks out and he ends up having his final duel with Macduff. And to me, this duel wasn't as interesting as the one I had just seen. However, the shots were very cool. It was kind of like they were in this narrow battlement, and it drew out, and it looked very sort of surreal and brutal. And they had this back and forth sword fight that was good.
I mean, the thing that most sticks with me about the fight between Macduff and Macbeth is that they do it on that very narrow battlement, where there's not a lot of room to maneuver. From I think too much about sword fighting perspective, that's interesting, and it signals the inevitability of it. It signals that this is fate. Macbeth is going to
You're on a rail, which is bringing it back to that railroad metaphor.
Right.
Macduff is like one of the only, if not the only, characters in this entire play who's just kind of a good guy, right? Like, there's not many. I guess Banquo is pretty solidly good. And interestingly, he's also one of the slightly less interesting characters to me. Like, maybe it's the complexity of all of these like characters who are haunted and tragic really lends something to them being interesting in a way that Macduff isn't in this. I don't know. Like, he's just kind of a good guy who's got some vengeance that he wants to have.
Well, you think even like the king early on, Duncan, is like, if we're to believe what's been said about him, is like this great guy, great king, cares for everyone, dies. Yeah. Maybe even because of that, you know, maybe because he's too trusting or whatever. And yeah, I think in this, Shakespeare just wanted to explore like more gray characters who were like legit evil. And
ultimately those characters are going to be slightly more interesting, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I am interested always in the scene between Malcolm and Macduff, where Malcolm comes up and is like, hey, I am the worst. Would you like me to be king? And Macduff is like, you can't be that bad. You can't be that bad. If you're really that bad, then I'm going to kill you.
Was that in this
Malcolm
movie?
was like, I was just kidding.
Was that in this movie? Or was it truncated in some way? Because I'm not...
It was, I think it may have been truncated.
Yeah, because I don't remember that moment, which is interesting because that really stood out to me in the play as an important little exchange.
Yeah. Well, it stood out to me in the play because I had to stare at it to figure out what Malcolm was doing. I must have skipped past it all the other times. I must have been like, I do not understand what's happening here. And this time I finally figured it out. And so that's the thing about even the best Shakespearean actor, it still goes by really fast. Yeah. So the work that they have to do is giving you the body language and the tone to convey the meaning, because you're not going to pick up the subtleties, at least in some cases. Like, you can pick up your tomorrow and tomorrow speech, the porter's jokes, like I can get those at speed. But to read on the page, I have to read it over and over. Anyway, getting back to Macduff.
So wait. So what is he doing here then? You said you got it eventually.
Right, I got it. My interpretation is that Malcolm is so devastated on behalf of Scotland that there is nobody worth anything, including himself. Like, I don't think he loved his dad. I don't think he was super happy to be prince and probably wanted the throne himself. And so I think he comes to Macduff being like, I bet you're probably just as much of a jerk as all these other bloodthirsty people who are responsible for my country. And so he's like testing him in a really screwed up way that's very self-deprecating. If you make me king, I'm going to rape all the women. He's just trying to get a rise out of him. And then when the rise he gets is the like best possible, Macduff, I would kill you rather than let you be king if that's really who you are. Then he's like, oh, I'm happy. This I feel like is something that Shakespeare does that doesn't hold up as well to a modern audience. It feels more staged. I don't know if you've seen that Much Ado About Nothing, but the like young heartthrob character who gets mad at Hero and for basically no reason, he has a very similar transition right at the end, and there's so much riding on it in that play where they have to tell him, no, actually, you completely misunderstood. Hero was not having sex with her doorman. It's all fine. You can get married. And he turns on a dime. And that scene with Malcolm reminds me of that in the same kind of way. It's like I've made my rhetorical point. Look at how cleverly I can wield language. And somehow that I have to think that must have hit harder to a Shakespearean audience than it does with us. It just feels glib.
One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up. We have Ross walk up to Malcolm at the end, Denzel head in hand, Macbeth head in hand, and a crown in the other. And he crowns the new king. And he's like gripping that neck too. Like, to me, again, Ross is a creepy character. And he gives him that crown, he puts it on, and he's got this look that's very like far off, and like, to me it was like he's believing his own greatness. And to me that was saying something about the corrupting power of the crown and the corrupting power of being a king, maybe, and maybe it's why kings aren't such a good idea. And I think that there was something being said there, like as much as Malcolm had seemed like a pretty good dude throughout, I didn't get the sense when he put that crown on that he was going to be a great king. I don't know. Anybody else read it that way?
The witches have told us in no uncertain terms that it's Banquo's issue
that's a good point,
who's going to remain on the throne for generation after generation.
True.
And I went and looked this up, and you guys were totally right. He's writing that to fluff up James I's ego, because he's descended from not the Stuarts, the other family that produced many English kings. Maybe it is the Stuarts. Anyway, so I think we all are meant to know that Malcolm's going to be king briefly and sort of ineffectually, and then he's going to be replaced by Fleance's issue. And historically, there were many, many generations between those two things, and at the time, James I believed that Fleance was his ancestor, and then in like the 1700s, that was revealed by scholars not to be the case, but he was already dead by then, so who cares? And like, does the play care? No. The play is just interested in showing us that fate has been orchestrated, right? The burst of crows, and the last thing we see is Ross and that kid. So yeah, I totally don't think you're imagining it. I think we're meant to think Malcolm played his role and now he can be shuffled off stage. And here's where you should focus. Look at the crows.
Okay, so we're going to have to leave it here, but we do have one last thing we like to do, and that is to make our picks for what was the better version. Admittedly, it's always a difficult decision, and it always feels a little silly, but it feels really silly here to try and choose between one of the greatest plays of all time, written by one of the greatest playwright, or the greatest playwright of all time, and a movie. No matter how great it is still a movie by a director, right? Like, how can it possibly stand up? However, it's a great movie by a great director. So let's go through the exercise, just to hear how we all thought about it when we were coming up with our choices. We'll have you go last, Michael. Do you want to start, James?
Yeah, so I think Shakespeare is just like overrated. No. So how can you possibly touch something as untouchable as Shakespeare and Macbeth? I think the reason, in this case, I'm going to take the film, is because it's such a high level of filmmaking that no one else is doing. very few at least. It gave me a better understanding of the story, which I didn't expect to get from an adaptation. And it was so striking, and the film nerd in me, the history buff, the film history buff, was just like really into the fact that he was like encapsulating all this history within a Macbeth adaptation, and the performances are super memorable. And I think that this will continue to live on in my mind as Macbeth. And then when I revisit Macbeth eventually, I'll be thinking of these actors and their performances and how that affects my read on Shakespeare going forward. So I'm taking the film.
Okay. I mean, this is, I already kind of talked about how impossible this kind of is. And I think that's because the nature of plays is they are meant to be seen. They are meant to be viewed in a way that a novel is not, right? A novel is meant to be held and read by a sole individual and sort of experienced in the mind in a way that you are viewing something by design in a play. So it lends itself towards an adaptation like this really, really well. Timeless, classic. Yet you have this film that nails it, that is coming at the end of a long line of adaptations and somehow managing to do something great and different and noteworthy when you're going to be compared to every other adaptation there is. So that is only could be attempted, I think, by a director who is at the point in their career that Joel Coen is, with the chops that he has, with the confidence that he has. So I'm going to give it to the movie as well, because I just loved watching it so much, and it brought the material to life for me, with the full caveat of the material is intended to be viewed in such a way. So, of course, Shakespeare didn't write the play for me to pick it up and read it. So, of course, this is going to be the experience that works. And these two things cannot be really extracted from each other. But in doing it, yeah, I guess I'll give it to the movie.
This is a very tough call for me. But I'm going to give it to Shakespeare, despite, but I have a lot of praise for Coen in leading to this. I mean, it is an amazing version of this play. It may be the best, so vivid. Never seen The Witches done like that. Never seen the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth be as human as it is here. But the overall effect that all that amazing work has had on me is to send me back to the material in a way that I missed. Like, I haven't read Shakespeare in earnest like this in a long time, and I give Joel Coen the credit, and everyone involved in this production, it's not just him, in like getting me excited about it again. Like, I'm sitting here intriguing over what Shakespeare actually intended for that third murderer, and what is Ross's purpose, and what do these monologues mean that I haven't obsessed about before. And that's great. Like, I enjoy that so much, and I used to enjoy it so much, and I'm so grateful that this movie was able to do that for me, like this previous Macbeth, the one with Fassbender, failed utterly to do. And it's not like I haven't been watching Shakespeare. I've seen Shakespeare in the Park the last couple of years. I saw Richard III. I saw The Tempest, Midsummer Night's Dream, and none of them sent me back to the material like this.
Yeah.
So still, though, I have to end with the fact that it is the material that gives me all this joy and excuses to spend time pondering the ineffable, unanswerable questions of lost history. And so, yeah, I'm giving the credit to Shakespeare.
Well said, and I think appropriate, right? Honestly, somebody needs to give credit to Shakespeare. That guy doesn't get enough credit.
Yeah.
But I think that's also a great transition to say thank you for coming on the podcast and joining us to talk about this material. It was a great opportunity for me to revisit Shakespeare really for the first time since high school. What a delight this has been, and what an awesome movie to end on. If our listeners wanted to check out Reckoning or your writing, where can they follow you online, that kind of stuff?
Reckoning is at reckoning.press. I got one of those cool new .press suffixes. It's easy to say and remember. And best find me on Twitter at Michael J. DeLuca.
Reckoning has, I think this is the 6th issue, right? So you've done 5 previously. All of them include short fiction, poetry, essays, artwork. And yeah, they're all really cool, and I think people should check them out. And if you want to know when my story comes out, you can follow me because I'm going to talk about it. Delighted to. I'm so honored and humbled to be in such an awesome magazine. It's very, very cool. But yeah, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on. People should follow you online. I'll put links to all of that in the show notes, so you can look down there and find them. Yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. This was so much fun.
Thank you very much for having me. This has been a great opportunity. Really appreciate all the cool ideas you have given me.
So before we wrap this thing up for real, I did want to say we have a Patreon poll right now up, and if you wanted to join our Patreon, which we would greatly appreciate, or if you're already a patron, check it out and you can vote on our next project. You only have a few days when this comes out. We're gonna be wrapping the poll, and we will be deciding what our very next project's gonna be. Go ahead and cast your vote on it, and you can help us decide what'll be next, and we greatly appreciate it.
And make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All of those at Ink to Film. And
if you enjoyed this episode and you enjoyed us talking about Shakespeare, first off, let us know. And one way to let us know is also to leave us a rating and review on whatever app you're on, which you can do now. You can leave ratings now on Spotify, so we'd love to get some more on there. If you are on YouTube, like the video, leave us a comment, and we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, so yeah, we don't actually know what our next project's going to be yet. We'll be finding out in the coming days. And until next time,
keep adapting.